Hi everyone, welcome to another video. Today I'm actually quite a bit smiling because we are going to be discussing completely brand new topic which we haven't gone through yet, and it relates to caffeine. Now the reason why to actually even dive into this is that I actually have quite good statistics is that now 90% of adults, which is just a huge number, actually use caffeine actually quite often, and it's also increasing in terms of kids, so you can actually think of both adolescents and teens in the same time frame, where the numbers are now 50%. So that's actually quite huge. But we'll be actually diving into caffeine in this video in slightly different form. Is that we'll be mainly discussing the two tools that could actually help you, one both for physical performance in any kinds, which means either endurance or workouts and any other. And then the second tool will be actually quite cool as well, which will be related to actually improving your mental performance. And that is again going to apply for work, studies, or anything you would actually like to learn much better. So I think that we'll first want to discuss that basically the effects of caffeine are mostly known that it induces a sense of well-being when you actually use it quite regularly as well. It improves your focus, and when you're actually quite kind of going sleepy, it will make you to be more alert. I think that is the most commonly known way that caffeine basically helps us. It's also quite a bit of associated with the chemical dopamine as well, but I don't think that the way it actually works is really well explained yet. So hopefully, I think that this kind of short explanation before we actually dive into the very interesting tools will actually help you. Now, what I want to first point out is that caffeine is actually a positive reinforcer pretty much for anything. What this actually means is that there was especially quite interesting study that was actually done on kids, and there were 6 different flavors of yogurts, and basically kids just picked any ones they liked the most. There was of course some questions on that time frame, but they were actually able to observe the evolution of the kind of the peaks that the kids usually did over time. So there were more eating bouts, and one of those flavors had caffeine in it. Now the kids didn't know there was actually caffeine in it, and you can't really taste it. I mean, if we were to put it into even broccoli, for example, you wouldn't be able to know that it's actually there. It's pretty much like a blend flavor almost. And what was actually found in this particular study is that the kids preferred over time heavily the one flavor which had the caffeine in it. So this is what we call something being a positive reinforcer, is that you are more likely to pick a particular food or even hobby or activity when you have, for example, caffeine with it, which is basically this positive reinforcer. Now, the second thing I think is interesting and important to point out is that, on the other hand, how caffeine works in terms of making you less sleepy, because now we discussed how it actually makes you want to even drink the beverages containing caffeine more and more because it's positive reinforcer. But then the second, I think, quite interesting thing is to actually head into the way of how it actually works. For that, we actually have to point out one huge and important molecule in this whole structure, which is actually adenosine. Now, I will tell you that adenosine works in a way that it makes you more sleepy. How you can actually think of it is that adenosine is at its lowest in the morning, usually about 2 to 3 hours after you wake up is at its lowest, and then it actually goes quite a bit high over the course of the day, and it's at the highest before you actually go to sleep, and it goes gradually down during the time you sleep. So this is, I would say, the majority of what happens when you get sleepy is this molecule adenosine, and the reason why caffeine works to actually counteract that is because caffeine in the brain docks in the same receptors where adenosine is usually found. So what happens is that it basically replaces adenosine, and because you don't have it in those same receptors, which are then linked to kind of your sleeping patterns in your brain, well, um, you don't really feel sleepy after all. Now, I will say one thing that I did mention, that after 2 or 3 hours, usually it's the adenosine is at its lowest, and that is because usually at that time sun is up. So I will just tell you one thing is that when you actually are able to see sunlight, or you are able to take cold showers or exercise, you are able to spike your spike your cortisol, and that is an important hormone, and it's usually taken as a bad thing, but spiking your cortisol is really important because that will help you to clear out any remaining adenosine which was left over into the morning. So what we actually want to basically also point out is that since caffeine docks in the same receptors, if as maybe one additional tool is that if you actually use coffee immediately after waking up, what you actually tend to then see is that when you actually take coffee immediately in the morning, you basically replace the adenosine those receptors and it basically still hangs around in your system. You pretty much aren't able to get rid of it that much even through sunlight exposure. And when the effects of caffeine over let's say 8 to 10 hours actually go down, then you might actually experience quite often an afternoon crash, which basically means that the adenosine that was left over from the morning and then the adenosine that was building up over the course of the day is basically a double hit, which gets you quite a bit sleepy, and we basically call that an afternoon crash. So this is what usually happens. So you could maybe try to, if that actually benefits you or if you have those issues, you could actually basically get coffee at least 120 minutes after waking up or even up to 2.5 hours. That would be actually most likely the best case to actually do it. So that's basically what will be quite a bit important to also point out. And I think that now is actually quite a good time to go into the first tools we would actually like to point out, and that is actually through physical performance. Now, I did mention that this tool does help with any kind of physical performance. It could be endurance training, physical training, workout, strength training, or hypertrophy training, any kind of workouts you would like to imagine. And what I like to again point out is that caffeine is basically a reinforcing agent, and the way it is positive reinforcing agent is that it spikes your dopamine and adrenaline at the same time. And those two molecules make you basically more motivated to enjoy the same activity or food or hobby at the same time. Now, because I want to point this out is that especially if you have issues of going to the gym or if you sometimes don't feel like pushing yourself to a particular additional rep or even trying higher weight load, well, if you actually use caffeine for the time before you actually went to the gym so you can actually drink coffee before that, you will be more likely to enjoy that particular activity. And you will be even more likely to basically get this additional rep in because you have much higher dopamine for the activity. So especially if you have issues to go to the gym or if you would like to have increased performance, it will actually do that through this motivation hormone. And what it basically does is that you don't actually have to push yourself harder. It will be actually much easier to get that additional rep or workout session in. So this is why it's especially useful for any kind of exercise because it works universally through the dopamine pathway. And I think that is actually very well documented as well in terms of its effects and that you can actually use that in any kind of performance bout. In terms of moving on from actually the physical performance, which I think is probably actually the main tool that you would like to use, the caffeine's effects for mental performance actually quite cool. And again, this is the area where it impacts pretty much everything. If you would like to learn any particular information, can be for your studies, can be for students, can be for work, it will work all in the same way. I will mention one thing is that there are actually quite well documented lists and papers dating back to medieval times when people used to throw kids into the river after they were learning particular information. They didn't know exactly what was behind that, but they assumed, and they were also correct, is that doing that will make your memory and learning much, much better. Now, I will tell you first why it actually works is that basically throwing kids into a river actually made them to spike both adrenaline and dopamine. And that one scenario exactly is basically a way where your brain gets into higher state of alertness, and at that point it is able to remember and learn much, much better from basically from the previous, let's say, half an hour or an hour as well. This same state usually happens when you're surprised by something, and I mean, it can be even positive or negative surprise as well, because that is something you will remember for a longer time. Now, how actually caffeine works into that is that caffeine basically spikes up the same molecules, so dopamine and adrenaline, when you drink it. Now, usually I think coffee is used to increase focus and it's taken before your studies to basically feel more alert. But even based on my own experience, even though I haven't drank coffee for I think like about year and a half or even maybe longer now, I myself actually remember a lot more what I did before doing the studies because I drank the coffee before them. So if you would like to basically improve your learning, the best thing to do is to actually take coffee after your studies and it will be much, much more easier for you to actually remember and learn that information, I think, effortlessly because you don't have to expend any more time to actually do it, but you will be able to automatically in your brain learn and remember that information because it spikes, because the caffeine spikes those two molecules, the dopamine and adrenaline, and those two are usually making you more alert, and they try to go back in terms of time to then make you more remember that situation. So this is very, I think, useful, and this can be actually used for any kind of really pretty much any studies or any also work about if you would like to learn something much better or how to do that. Spiking those two chemicals with the caffeine after is actually quite a bit helpful. Now, there's actually one additional tool I would like to point out, and this actually relates to sugar cravings. And if you especially have those, I will come back again to this point of caffeine being a positive reinforcer, is that you probably would like to watch out what foods you actually eat. Because, for example, caffeine can be found in chocolate. So when we did talk about that, basically caffeine makes you more likely to pick a particular food or habit or activity as well. Well, if you, it actually then acts as a kind of a double hit because sugar itself makes you quite a bit more likely to eat it again, but caffeine is again a positive reinforcer for that. So that could be actually a way to actually look out for the ingredients and maybe ditch those particular foods because you will be much more likely to actually go back to them again and again if they actually contain caffeine. Now, what actually isn't often discussed is that it actually could be used to a positive benefit as well. I think actually this is quite interesting, is that if you particularly would like to incorporate some healthier foods into your diet, you can use caffeine in conjunction with those. So let's say you could like to incorporate more greens into your diet, leaves, for example, or broccoli as well. Well, if you actually pair caffeine with that, you will be more likely to enjoy that particular type of food, even if you don't like it the first time, again and again. I mean, the same way as when you most likely drank coffee for the first time and it could have tasted bitter. Well, now I think up to 90% of adults drink it quite often. So this is the way you can actually use it for any kind of food or activity or hobby, as we discussed, for example, for gym. So this is basically a diving deeper into caffeine. Hopefully this was quite a bit interesting for you in terms of the tools you can actually derive. I think those are actually quite a bit broader because you can just use them anywhere you would like. So hopefully this actually was quite a bit helpful. Thank you.